Hold everything, hockey fans! We're witnessing what could be the most spine-tingling moment of poetic justice in Toronto Maple Leafs history. 2 decades of playoff heartbreak, 2 decades of broken promises, and suddenly, in one electric moment, the hockey gods have delivered something that feels almost supernatural. Max Doyle, carrying the weight of his father's legacy on his shoulders, has just scored an overtime winner against the Ottawa Senators that has the entire hockey world buzzing with disbelief. This wasn't just any goal. This was a moment where past and present collided in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. 23 years ago, Max's father Ty Doyle watched helplessly as the Leafs surrendered their playoff hopes in overtime to these very same Senators. Now, like a script written by the hockey gods themselves, the son returns to rewrite family history and potentially change the trajectory of a franchise that has been searching for redemption since 2002. The symmetry is almost too perfect to be coincidental. Toronto hasn't led a playoff series 2-0 since that fateful year when Ty Doyle wore the blue and white. As Max's perfectly placed shot sailed past Linus Ullmark into the corner of the net, you could almost feel 2 decades of frustration evaporating into the Air Canada Centre rafters. But this story goes far deeper than just one beautiful goal. It's about legacy, identity, and potentially the beginning of something much bigger in Toronto. As we dive into this unfolding drama, prepare yourself for not just the emotional weight of this moment, but also the strategic chess match happening behind the scenes that could reshape the Maple Leafs roster before our very eyes. The magnitude of Max Doyle's overtime winner cannot be fully appreciated without understanding the historical context that makes it so profoundly meaningful to the Maple Leafs faithful. In April 2002, Ty Doyle embodied the grit, muscle, and heart of a Toronto team that had legitimate Stanley Cup aspirations. That playoff run featured the infamous Battle of Ontario against the Senators, a series defined not just by hockey skill, but by visceral physicality, personal vendettas, and emotional intensity that transcended the sport itself. When Ottawa eliminated Toronto in overtime that year, it wasn't just a loss. It was a wound that never properly healed in the collective psyche of Leafs Nation. Fast forward to today, and the parallels are striking beyond coincidence. The Leafs once again held a commanding 2-0 lead before allowing Ottawa to claw back and force overtime. The ghosts of collapses past seemed to materialize in real time, as nervous energy permeated the building. Then, in a moment of pure cinematic perfection, Ty Doyle's son stepped into the spotlight and delivered redemption with a perfectly placed shot that silenced every critic and awakened every dormant dream in Toronto. Max, who joined the Leafs last July on a 1-year, $3 million contract, was initially viewed as merely a depth signing, a familiar name that might provide some secondary scoring and veteran presence. Most analysts considered his acquisition an unremarkable move by GM Brad Trilling, especially given Max's inconsistent production while splitting the previous season between Chicago and Dallas. But sometimes hockey transcends statistical analysis, and what the spreadsheets can't measure is the emotional resonance of a player whose bloodline is intertwined with franchise history. Max Doyle is more than just a third-line forward with modest offensive upside. He represents a living connection to the team's emotional core and an opportunity to heal generational wounds that have festered for over 2 decades. The dramatic overtime winner, however, has created an unexpected strategic dilemma for Toronto's front office that goes far beyond sentimentality. According to multiple sources close to the organization, GM Brad Trilling had been meticulously monitoring the team's early playoff performance with an eye toward potential roster adjustments. With Toronto now holding a commanding 2-0 series lead, a position they haven't experienced in 23 years, the front office finds itself at a fascinating crossroads with the trade deadline approaching. Max Doyle's clutch performance has dramatically increased his market value, transforming him from a depth piece into a potential trade centerpiece that could address Toronto's persistent defensive vulnerabilities. The rumors circulating through hockey insider circles suggest 2 divergent paths forward. Either embrace Doyle as an emotional cornerstone of this playoff run, building around his clutch performance and locker room presence, or leverage his skyrocketing value to acquire a top 4 defenseman who could shore up Toronto's most glaring weakness. The name generating the most buzz in these theoretical discussions is Noah Hanifin of the Calgary Flames, a skilled, versatile left-handed defenseman approaching free agency whose contract negotiations have stalled. The potential fit makes strategic sense for both sides. Calgary, looking to refresh their roster, could view Doi as both an immediate offensive contributor and a veteran leader with playoff experience. Toronto would gain a mobile, reliable defenseman capable of easing Morgan Reilly's workload while bringing balance to their often exploited blue line. Analytics support the case for strengthening the defense. Despite Doi's personal +6 rating in high-pressure situations, the team continues to struggle against physically imposing forechecking teams, particularly during defensive zone transitions. Hanifin would address this specific vulnerability, potentially transforming Toronto from a talented but flawed contender into a genuine Stanley Cup threat. The complexity of this situation transcends mere hockey strategy, venturing into the emotional territory that makes sports so compelling. As Toronto weighs this potential trade, they must calculate not just the on-ice impact, but the psychological ripple effects throughout the organization and fan base. What message would it send to trade the hero of the moment, especially one with such profound symbolic significance, in the middle of a potentially historic playoff run? Would such a move undermine the very confidence and momentum that Max Doi's goal has generated? The statistical case for improving the defense is clear. According to Natural Stat Trick, Toronto's metrics against heavy forechecking teams reveal significant vulnerabilities that could be exploited in later playoff rounds. Yet hockey isn't played on spreadsheets. It's played by human beings whose performance is influenced by confidence, emotion, and belief. Trading Doi immediately after his moment of generational redemption could create a narrative of cold calculation that might damage team chemistry at precisely the wrong moment. This strategic dilemma has been further complicated by another roster move that reveals just how ruthlessly the business of hockey operates even in moments of triumph. While Max Doi was being celebrated as Toronto's newest hero, Alex Nylander was quietly placed on waivers, a necessary salary cap maneuver to accommodate players returning from injury. The cruel irony wasn't lost on keen observers. Just weeks after the heartwarming story of Alex joining his brother William Nylander on the Maple Leafs roster, the business side of hockey has potentially separated them. The Columbus Blue Jackets, where Alex enjoyed his most productive NHL stretch with 11 goals in 23 games last season, now have waiver priority and could claim him for nothing. A stark reminder that in professional sports, sentimentality takes a backseat to strategic necessity. As this dramatic situation continues to unfold, what remains clear is that the Toronto Maple Leafs are at a pivotal crossroads that could define their franchise for years to come. Max Doi's overtime heroics have created both opportunity and complexity, a moment of emotional catharsis that simultaneously offers strategic possibilities and challenges. GM Brad Trilling now faces the unenviable task of deciding whether to ride the emotional wave of Doi's goal toward what could be a storybook playoff run, or to make the cold, calculated move of trading a suddenly beloved figure to address long-standing defensive issues. The Calgary connection remains the most intriguing possibility, with Noah Hanifin representing exactly the type of defenseman who could elevate Toronto from perennial disappointment to legitimate contender. His potential acquisition would provide the balance and stability that has eluded the Maple Leafs' blue line for years, particularly against the physically dominant teams that typically emerge as playoff juggernauts. Yet there's an undeniable emotional cost to trading away a player who just delivered one of the most meaningful goals in recent franchise history, especially one whose family narrative so perfectly embodies the organization's decades-long struggle for redemption. For Toronto's long-suffering fanbase, Max Doi's overtime winner represented more than just a Game 2 victory. It symbolized the possibility that perhaps, finally, the hockey gods have decided to smile upon them after years of torment. Trading away the author of that moment could feel like tempting fate at precisely the moment when destiny seems to be tilting in their favor. As the series shifts locations and the front office contemplates its next move, one thing becomes abundantly clear. The story of these Toronto Maple Leafs is being written in real time, with each decision potentially altering the course of hockey history in Canada's largest city. Whether Max Doi remains to continue his father's legacy or becomes the trade piece that finally brings defensive stability to Toronto, his overtime goal has already secured its place in the rich tapestry of Maple Leafs lore, and for a franchise and fan base that have endured so much heartbreak, perhaps that moment alone, regardless of what follows, represents a kind of victory that transcends the traditional metrics of hockey success. Hockey fans. I've never seen anything quite like this unfolding drama in my 20 years covering the NHL. The combination of family redemption, strategic chess moves, and playoff intensity has created perhaps the most fascinating storyline of this entire postseason. If you're as captivated by this unfolding saga as I am, smash that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you trade Max Domi after his historic goal, or is the emotional value of his presence worth more than any defensive upgrade? Your passionate hockey knowledge drives this community, and I can't wait to see where you stand on what might be the most consequential decision of the Maple Leafs playoff run.